Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet, and somewhat comically, as I saved the last podcast recording, I realised that I hadn't made an announcement that I wanted to talk about. I actually had previously. I recorded this podcast, which is why I thought, I've got that podcast to put up. But in actual fact, there were elements of the podcast recording where I didn't explain certain features, and it ended up on the cutting room floor. The features I didn't explain specifically related to Google's Summer of Code. Every year through the Noble Ape developer mailing list, there's some email late in the day associated with Google's Summer of Code, and darn it, we've forgotten to submit the paperwork once again. Another year will go by without students assisting in Noble Ape. Google's Summer of Code is not really a competition. It's kind of curious, actually, but the idea in its raw and somewhat unpolluted form is that college students will be paid $5,500, with $500 going to the open source project, to work on a particular open source project, some aspect of that project, for their summer time. It's Northern Hemisphere summer. Let's move on from the various regional issues. So that is Google's Summer of Code. And this year I decided to start early. I wrote up a document. I shared the document with a number of other folk, and there were a number of edits made to the document. And this was going to be a submission that I'd write up and present to Google so we could get a student or maybe two to work on Noble Ape through their summer. Then I started reading about Google's Summer of Code. I started reading about the requirements. I started reading about the projects that had been selected, and in particular the projects that hadn't been selected, because my thought is, when you invest 20 or 30 hours into something, you don't want it to be speculative. You want it to be a home run out of the park. I mean, certainly I feel that way. I feel my time has a certain degree of value, and to put my time just in writing up a document to send to Google for Google to do nothing about or send back some snarky response, I mean, this is a waste of my time. So I talked with my wife, and we agreed that if I ran a Kickstarter as well, I could put up the money for one student plus the money that was generated through Kickstarter or some partial through that. And the idea was that we would have a Gorilla of Code, which is the Noble Ape alternative to Summer of Code, with some interesting projects and the ability initially to fund one student, but depending on how the Kickstarter goes, funding more students based on that Kickstarter. Thought to myself, am I just replacing one bureaucracy with another, trading Google with Kickstarter? And I thought to myself, well, at least I'll get one student out of it. Kickstarter genuinely concerns me on a few levels, but I think it's also important to put this thing out, 20 years of Noble Ape is a real thing. It's a real amount of time, it's a real amount of work, it's a real amount of involvement by a number of folk, and I could keep it kind of quiet and just publicize it with an audio release and this kind of stuff, or I could put it out on Kickstarter as a means of promoting the 20 years of Noble Ape. I've made some alterations to this thing. I've decided instead of 20 audio tracks for the 20 years of Noble Ape, I'm only going to put out 12. That's a practical thing. I find it very hard to hold 20 tunes in my head continuously. 12 is slightly more doable, and I can disambiguate the tunes and these kind of things and think of improvements through the day and this kind of stuff. So the 20 tracks for 20 years of Noble Ape will be 12 tracks, maybe with some incidental music thrown in as well. But I just thought 12 is a much more normative amount, and it's easier to record given my general time frames and these kind of things. So the Kickstarter will also have as a prize, not really a prize, part of the giveaway for Kickstarter, my friend Mike, who works for Roman Films. He's like he's in charge of all the background art on The Simpsons, basically. So he has agreed to provide a piece of art that will be on a t-shirt that will be part of the Kickstarter. And also I can provide signed copies of the original manual. Skype calls are now a big thing on Kickstarter, so I could have Skype calls for the various people who put in money, also potentially release podcast chats with them, all this kind of stuff. I mean, fitting a number of the projects together here to celebrate 20 years of Noble Ape. And I think this is relatively doable. I'm certainly mindful that compared to just passing it on to Google with the blind hope that they might accept Noble Ape and do all this kind of stuff, the Kickstarter, I'm in really two minds about it. It's a lot of additional stress, some additional work for, again, some kind of speculation, but I'm going to do the Gorilla of Code irrespective of the Kickstarter result, and all the Kickstarter result can do is bring more people to the project, get more people's interest, and ultimately translate to an audience that is invested in some way in this 20-year celebration. I'm interested to hear from listeners in terms of what they think associated with this, whether this is a good idea, whether they have some concerns, all the above, and maybe they're interested in participating or contributing to some of the giveaway items or whatever they're called associated with Kickstarter. You know, you get stuff through Kickstarter. And also feedback associated with this whole thing, associated with aspects that I discussed and potential concerns and these kind of things. Because one of the things I like with Short Funk, very interactive, very contributive community. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.